Dear delegates, good afternoon. I hope you enjoyed your lunch and that you were able to attend a side events as well. This morning, when we considered agenda item 6, we had on our list speakers from the following parties of Cartagena Protocol: Bangladesh, Sweden, Cote d'Ivoire, and Moldova. First, I would like to give a floor to Bangladesh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, respected delegates. Bangladesh strongly acknowledges the findings and recommendations of the ad hoc technical expert group regarding risk assessment and risk management provided in Substa/26/5. We'd like to express our sincere appreciation to HT Tech for their utmost effort to develop additional voluntary guidance materials, particularly living modified mosquitoes containing engineered gene drivers, in accordance with Annex 3 to the Cartagena Protocol. Since Bangladesh always attaches importance on the risk assessment and risk management in research and developments of LMOs, we welcome additional voluntary guidance materials that would be a supporting tool for the risk assessment and risk management of the living modified mosquitoes. Madam Chair, Bangladesh reiterates its position on international cooperation for the capacity building, knowledge sharing, transfer of technology, and resource mobilization on risk assessment of LMOs. Bangladesh would also be delighted to take part to prepare the recommendation on the basis of discussion towards reissuing the additional voluntary guidance materials to support case-by-case risk assessment for consideration by the Conference of Parties serving as a meeting of parties to the Cartagena Protocol. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Bangladesh. Sweden, followed by Cote d'Ivoire.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I would like to congratulate the ARTEC for producing, within a very short time frame, a robust guidance material on the risk assessment of living modified organisms containing engineered gene drives. Sweden broadly supports the statement by Belgium under this agenda item. However, we suggest some amendments to the recommendation text. Sweden proposes the word welcome rather than endorse in paragraph 2 of the draft recommendation when referring to the voluntary guidance document, because endorse for us means that the party should stand behind all parts of the document, and this would require thorough review to approve the entire document. We see the guidance as a living document that should be developed according to needs and experiences. However, Sweden wishes again to emphasize our appreciation and support for the guidance produced by the ARTEC. We will also submit our comments and amendments to the Secretary in writing for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Sweden, very much. Cote d'Ivoire, followed by Republic of Moldova.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Chair. Cote d'Ivoire supports the position of the African Group as set out by Malawi. Chair, my statement will focus on the outcomes of the expert group on the document which we are currently discussing. I've heard said, though, that the outcome is so weak that it doesn't really merit much interest. Chair, the expert group was set up to draft a methodological guidance for risk assessment and management. Has the group produced results today, given the time which was granted to them? But I think we can correct them because we do have a basis document to guide our process. Chair, there are lacks and there are challenges, but just as for any documents which we have seen until now, none of them are perfect. Therefore, we can go along with this document and really place an emphasis on specific areas for development and true capacity development for better ownership and take-up. Côte d'Ivoire therefore calls for all parties to improve the document to enable a better assessment, a better management, and progress in the fields of research by sharing our experiences. Côte d'Ivoire therefore supports the recommendations which have been made. Chair, I would like to mark a brief pause. I apologise for coming back to a motion which was raised by the DRC. Based on the response by the Acting Executive Secretary, I don't think I'm making baseless arguments. But this is not an issue of abbreviations, as what's been said. This is a fact. It's a fact on the writing of the IPLC acronym. Since the start of the adoption of the convention and how it is now written, and you can see for yourself in the documents. We have ILP and LC. And I think this produces strange wordings, which I don't even want to say here. So I'd ask for the opinion of the person who introduced the motion before continuing with the session to see the legality behind that motion. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Côte d'Ivoire. Now I would like to give a floor to Republic of Moldova.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Moldova appreciates the work done by ATEC on risk assessment and endorse the voluntary guidance on GM+ and mosquitoes. We support the statements made by Belgium, Finland, Austria, Hungary, and others. We consider that guidance is the start point and additional work is needed to improve it. Especially further work is needed on risk and uncertainties in the availability of spread of beyond target area spread to non-targeted organisms and transboundary movement of certain types of gene drives and LMOs. Plus, I would like to arise the necessity of assessment of socioeconomic, cultural, and ethical impacts, as well as due to necessity of liability and redress issues. Moldova also supports the Egypt introduced text for a risk assessment discussion to reaffirm the application of the precautionary approach and calls on papers, other governments and observers, including research entities, to ensure that there is no environmental release on high risk and unassessed living modified organisms contained engineered gene drives. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Republic of Moldova. Before going to the list of non-parties to Cartagena Protocol, I would like to give a floor to Brazil.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to raise 2 points of order. The first one concerns the beginning, the time of the beginning of this meeting. I'm sure everyone is reasonable. We can support 5 or 10 minute delay before starting a meeting, but I think we cannot afford to spend half an hour waiting for a meeting to start with. We do not have this time. So I kindly appeal to you and the Secretariat for us to try to be reasonable with the time. The second, and we certainly, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because again, we do not have this time, but I need to flag out that concerning we were informed that tonight we would have a contact group on synthetic biology. And I need to flag out my countries, and I think this concern is shared by other countries from my region as well. with the convening of 2 simultaneous contact groups on night sessions on the very second day. These are 2 very important, relevant issues. And this affects participation by some delegations, especially the smaller ones. At the same time, we also would like to have some clarification concerning the expected outcomes of this contact group, since it is our understanding that we will not have a CRP on synthetic biology. So what exactly are we supposed to discuss in tonight's session? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brazil, for your statements. For your first point of order, schedule for this session was 3:15. So we were late 15 minutes for a reason. But I apologize for this to be late. I am very aware that we do not have enough time, which is really very connected with your second point of order. This is usual practice that we do have 2 contact groups during SABSTA conferences. And of course, we will keep this practice during this SABSTA conference. Otherwise, we cannot finish our business. But you do have more questions about expected outcomes of tonight's discussion. And for that, I would like to ask Secretariat to explain. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the question. So in decision 1531, the subsidiary body was requested to consider the report on the effectiveness of the horizon scanning process established in paragraph 4 above at its meeting prior to the 16th meeting of the Conference of the Parties, and to make recommendation on the need to extend the process. So in the first sitting of the contact group, the review process would be done. Following the first sitting, non-paper would be prepared for further work in the additional sessions of the contact group. And these would be the recommendations that potentially could be forwarded to the Conference of the Parties. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretariat. Before we continue, I would like to ask each party for cooperation and for respecting of schedule, which was, of course, discussed this morning in Bureau and agreed this morning in Bureau. Now, I would like to ask Brazil if you can agree to proceed with the plan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank the Secretariat for the clarification. Still, it is our understanding that all parties had the opportunity to provide their views on substantive issues concerning synthetic biology. So what exactly are we supposed to do? Parties are supposed to provide additional views? Is that the idea? Because we're not have any text as a basis for negotiation. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. So there were some differing views amongst the different delegations. So some of the discussions would be to further refine some of the ideas before preparing the non-paper, so that the non-paper would be perhaps a little bit more concise and clear. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretariat. Brazil, can you agree? Thank you very much for your cooperation. From my side, I really do understand concern of small delegations, and that is a persistent concern in this body. So that this is something that we need to think how to resolve. But for this time and for probably many times after this, we need to use our time efficiently, as you said in your point of order. I apologize again for these 15 minutes, and I would like to proceed. Thank you very much. Now, I would like to give a floor to Argentina as a non-party. Argentina, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. But before beginning my statement, let me join Brazil in their point regarding the duplication of contact groups. The delegation of Argentina does not agree that that is a standard practice of this body to have 2 parallel contact groups in every substantive agenda item when there's only 1 funded delegate per developing country, and we think it would not be constructive for the COP to receive draft documents, draft decisions that have not been able to be reviewed by all delegates. This could risk reopening texts at COP because we may find ourselves in a situation where a delegation may say, well, look, at SABSTA I was alone and I was following the monitoring framework. I was not able to be in synthetic biology, for example. So we do not agree with that. But having said that, of course, we're in your hands and we will try to follow as much as possible the discussions. But I think that we should not state that this is standard and agreed practice for SABSTA or for SBI or for any working group that we run with 2 parallel contact groups when there's only 1 funded delegate. If we go to the exact previous period that we had, we were having 2 parallel contact groups, but we were having at least 2 delegates per developing country in the meeting. Now I will turn to the agenda item of risk assessment, if you allow me. Thank you very much. And I will read our statement in Spanish. Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to take part in this important dialogue. Argentina would like to thank the expert group for their work and recommends supporting the voluntary guidance for the assessments, or risk assessments of modified living organisms which contain gene drives. In particular, we appreciate the scientifically robust work of the expert group, which produced guidance based on a problem formulation approach, which we think is adequate and transparent. Nevertheless, Argentina would advise against supporting the proposal to draft new guidance for other living modified organisms, such as genetically modified fishes or insects. Esteemed delegates, Annex 3 to the Cartagena Protocol provides an adequate framework for the assessment of any living modified organism. Argentina believes that genetically modified fishes or insects do not present any particular challenge which would require a different multilateral approach, different to that established in that annex. This is demonstrated with the fact that there are already assessments and authorizations granted to this type of organism by regulatory systems of various countries present in this very room. In addition, Argentina highlights that the 5 opinions submitted by parties on additional guidance show a lack of agreement when it comes to the need to continuing with this work. Therefore, Argentina does not see the need to prioritize the development of new guidance for these living modified organisms in the short term. Argentina recommends not allocating the scarce resources of the Secretariat to new ARTEGs or online forums for the next intersessional period. These valuable funds should be allocated to capacity building and technology transfer, which is required by developing countries to implement the Cartagena Protocol and the Global Framework on Biodiversity. Argentina has worked closely with the parties to the Cartagena Protocol in this discussion, and we hope that our observations will be taken into account in the drafting of new recommendations for the next Conference of the Parties. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Argentina, for your statement. Regarding your first point, I really do not wish to take a time of this plenary, but I would like to ask you to raise this question in appropriate body. There needs to be there is subsidiary body who should think more about participation and funding of participants, and this body is not for this discussion. But I raise your concern from my own position. Thank you very much. Now I would like to give a floor to 221, microphone to 221, indigenous peoples. IPLCs.
Madam Chair, I'm speaking on the behalf of IAB. We thank Secretary for the document. IAB welcome the ATEC reports. We notice the progress on the human rights-based approach for indigenous peoples and local community. The living modified organism containing engineered gene drives is complicated and uncertainties. Adverse impacts on species, biodiversity, and to Mother Nature, food, health, lands, waters, and ecosystem, and territory, resources, traditional livelihoods, values of biodiversity. The various consequences of a living modified organism containing gene drives, such as mosquito and living modified fish, can happen within another species are not well known that causes negative impacts. For indigenous peoples and local community, nature is alive and sacred. She has a species and relationship with the traditional knowledge, innovation, spirituals, and cosmological values in conservation, customary sustainable use of biodiversity. The new and emerging issues, living modified organisms containing gene engineered drives may adverse impact on biodiversity and conservation are not on the spirit and objective of the convention. Therefore, IFB would like to make a proposal to take into account the human right based approach, free prior informed consent, CBD codes of ethical conduct for working with indigenous peoples and local community, and precautionary approach. Further, we suggest indigenous peoples and local community to add just after the stakeholders. Traditional knowledge, innovation, and practices of indigenous peoples and local community to aid the knowledge sharing as a cultural approach to aid just after the capacity building. Full and effective participation and of the indigenous peoples and local community, women and youth to add just after the living modified peace. In order to establish a partnership, knowledge sharing, recognizing traditional knowledge, practices innovation of indigenous peoples and local community, and their equal access to resource mobilization and capacity building should be cultural appropriate to ensure the full and effective participation of indigenous people and local community from all 7 ecoregions. The written text submitted to the Secretariat, we would like to request parties to support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, IPLC. I would like to ask parties for support for this statement. Democratic Republic of Congo is supporting. Thank you very much. The next, microphone 273, CBD Alliance.
My name is Barbara Ntambrechi from Uganda. I'm speaking on behalf of CBD Alliance. I extend our gratitude to the ATEG for their efforts in developing guidelines that eliminate critical risks. These guidelines highlight issues vital to the parties, including transboundary movements of gene-drive organisms and the challenges in confining them, as well as the potential for gene flow to non-target species. In their present form, the guidelines are not immediately usable by the parties for risk assessment. There is a clear need for a refined methodology specifically tailored to gene drives. The existing framework is designed primarily for living modified organisms, and it fails to address the unique characteristics and challenges posed by gene drives, such as their explicit design, intention of spread, and persistence within wild populations across a potential range of receiving environments and over a long time. Also, there is an over-reliance on modeling and monitoring to address uncertainties. We ask parties to renew the ARTEC mandate for another round. Decision 1419 also sets out precautionary conditions that should be met before any consideration of introducing such organisms into the environment, including for experimental releases and research and development purposes. We therefore propose the following text and ask parties for their support. Decides to continue further work on improving draft guidance materials on risk assessment of living modified organisms containing engineered gene drives. The second is to decide to conduct a wider assessment of the socio-economic, cultural, and ethical impacts of living modified organisms containing engineered gene drives, in particular on indigenous people and local communities, as a complement to the draft guidance materials on risk assessment of such organisms. And the third is to ensure that the procedure for avoiding or managing conflicts of interest in expert groups as contained in Decision 1433 is properly applied to expert group members. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, CBD Alliance. I ask parties if there is support. There is support from Egypt and Moldova. Thank you for your support. Now I would like to ask microphone to 705, youth.
Thank you, Chair. I am speaking on behalf of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. We support the interventions of the IIFB and the CBD Alliance. We appreciate the hard work that the ARTEC realized in a very short time frame to develop additional voluntary guidance materials to support case-by-case risk assessment of living modified organisms containing engineered gene drives. While the guidelines already contain many good elements, we believe that there is a need to continue the work to make the guidance more operational and to provide further guidance on the challenges that countries would encounter while conducting such a risk assessment. In particular, as youth, we would like to see the guidance on the implementation of precautionary principle during the risk assessments further developed and strengthened. First of all, the precautionary principle is part of the preamble of the Convention. Secondly, the implementation of this principle is crucial to fulfill the considerations outlined in Section C of the GBF, especially the consideration of intergenerational equity. Thirdly, in the Decision 14/19, parties set out precautionary conditions that should be met before any consideration of environmental release of engineered gene drives due to the potential adverse effects. Key issues relating to the central risks of gene drives, such as their explicit design with the intention to spread and persist, as well as the high levels of uncertainty regarding potential impacts, require further consideration. We call on all parties to understand potential impacts holistically, including the social, economic, cultural, traditional, religious, or ethical concerns, and take these into consideration in their decision-making process, as also recommended by the ARTEG. Finally, there is a need to include more on the issue of where liability lies in case damages occur. We therefore call on all parties to extend the work of the ARTEG on risk assessment to further work on the voluntary guidance materials. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, youth. Is there support for the statement of youth from parties? There is support from Dominican Republic. The next speakers can talk for 2 minutes. I would like to ask Academia 261 to take the floor.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. This statement is on behalf of the Federation of German Scientists and the European Network of Scientists for Social and Environmental Responsibility. As members of the ARTEC on risk assessment, we would like to share our views with you on the current guidance document on LMOs containing engineered gene drives. Together with some other ARTEC members, it is our conclusion that the document is lacking and should therefore be considered an interim version. Gene drive technologies have been running into challenges regarding efficacy and performance. Nevertheless, in addition to mosquitoes, numerous gene drive development target other insects, mammals such as rodents or feral cats, fish, snails, and fungi. It is understood that releasing such gene drive organisms could have severe adverse consequences for biodiversity, ecosystems, and human and animal health. The lack of knowledge about interactions and interdependencies in ecosystems, combined with the unknown and unpredictable behavior of gene drives and gene drive organisms, pose serious challenges for risk assessment. Therefore, we ask the parties to recognize the need for further development of the guidance to make it fit for purpose. Topics for improvement should include, but not be limited to, first, more guidance on cutoff criteria when a risk assessment cannot be completed. Second, describe in detail the conceptual and practical challenges when implementing the steps, such as how to operationalize protection goals. Third, shift the focus in the problem formulation step from novel characteristics to novel organisms. Fourth, reduce the over-reliance on modeling and emphasize the need for actual experimental evidence and field data for safety and efficacy. Fifth, provide guidance on assessing the consequences of unintended gene flow into non-target organisms and the spread of gene drives and gene drive organisms beyond the intended receiving environment across space and time. We are asking for support of parties to this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for your statement. Is there support from parties? There is support from Egypt, Moldova, Côte d'Ivoire. And Nepal. Thank you very much. Now I would like to give the floor to microphone 263, Academia also.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am Fred Abuajienchi, and I speak on behalf of University of Ghana. The new additional and voluntary guiding materials on risk assessment of living modified organisms containing engineered gene drives effectively build upon Annex 3 of the Cartagena Protocol, providing detailed guidance for assessing the potential adverse effects of gene-drive mosquitoes. The guidance material recognizes that there are many different types of gene-drive constructs for many different users and contexts, and proposes a case-by-case approach to determine the possible risks and benefits of each application. The guidance makes provisions to consider both risks and benefits, including contributions to human health and the impact on vector-borne disease burden for a diverse range of gene-drive technologies. Socioeconomic impacts are very important considerations for decision-making by national authorities. We have existing frameworks to do so at national level, such as the environmental, social, economic, and health impact assessment, which are well established with existing international standards. Therefore, the proposal currently considered under SynBio will be an inefficient allocation of limited resources. The excellent work done by the ATEC highlights the importance of assessments being done on a case-by-case basis, whether it is for risk assessment or impact assessment. And therefore, we urge parties not to reconsider these proposals made under synthetic biology. We support the intervention of Malawi on behalf of Africa, Uganda, and of New Zealand regarding the importance of having a clear and funded plan for capacity building activities at national level to help countries implement the guidance. We will also stress the importance of support to technology, development, and transfer. We seek the support of parties. Thank you.
Thank you very
Madam
much.
Chair.
May I ask parties if there is support? Thank you very much. This statement has support from Burkina Faso and Uganda. And New Zealand and Cote d'Ivoire. And Togo, thank you very much. And Ghana. Thank you. Now I would like to give you microphone to 205, UNEP. UNEP, did you ask for the floor?
A mistake. Sorry.
Thank you all. I see no more requests for the floor. We have completed the first reading of agenda item 6, risk assessment and risk management of living modified organisms. I see that we have a lot of common understanding on the draft recommendations and that there is general support for the additional voluntary guidance on risk assessment of living modified organisms containing engineered gene drives. Therefore, I will prepare conference room paper with the help of Secretariat, and in doing so, consult with parties where there are some differences. Thank you again. We will now take up item 7, detection and identification of living modified organisms. I now invite the Secretariat to take the floor to introduce item 7.
Thank you, Chair. For this item, the Secretariat has prepared pre-sessional document 26/6. This document contains an overview of the submission of information on detection and identification of living modified organisms, a summary of the online discussions of the network of laboratories for the detection and identification of living modified organisms, other relevant information, and draft recommendations for consideration by the subsidiary body. In addition, the Secretariat has prepared information documents 1 and 2. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretariat. Before I open the floor for comments, I would like to highlight that according to decision, CP10/11, the subsidiary body will make a recommendation on the need to update Biosafety Technical Series 05, training manual for the detection and identification of living modified organisms in the context of Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. This training manual was published in April 2022 and made available in all 6 official languages of the United Nations. As this item is under Cartagena Protocol, I will give priority in the list of speakers to parties to the protocol. I remind you that I will be limiting statements to 3 minutes for regional groups. Apologies. To 5 minutes to regional groups, 3 minutes for parties, 4 minutes for IPLCs and major stakeholder groups, and 2 minutes for non-parties to the protocol and observers. Following interventions by observers, I will give a brief chance for parties that may wish to comment or support any specific proposal made. And again, please submit the full text to the Secretariat. Please note, however, that your key points, especially those that you would like to have reflected in the draft recommendations, should be read out in the room. I will now open the floor for interventions on item 7. First on the list is Togo. Togo, you have the floor.
Merci. Thank you, Madam. Togo wishes to speak to this current draft decision on behalf of the African Group. Madam Chair, through decision CP10/11, the Conference of the Parties, as meeting of the parties to the Cartagena Protocol on the prevention of biological risks, noted with a great deal of satisfaction the publishing of the training manual number 5 on the detection and identification of living modified organisms within the framework of the Cartagena Protocol on the prevention of biotechnological risks. Within the framework of the implementation of this decision, certain African states carried out capacity building activities when it comes to the methods, sampling, selection, detection and identification of living modified organisms. However, Madam, the shortcomings in terms of capacity building on a technical and scientific level remains and should be tackled with special attention. Madam Chair, Africa backs the draft decision CBD Substa 26/6, including paragraphs 1, 2, 4b, and 4d, which recommend that the parties and relevant organizations, as well as laboratory networks, to engage in a sharing of information and publications on new identification technologies in the field of emerging technologies, as an addition to the technical training manual and the bolstering of technical cooperation frameworks through the creation of regional networks of laboratories. Having said this, Madam, Africa turns to the Executive Secretariat and asks it to update manual number 6 on detection and identification to include LMOs which are newly developed. To facilitate capacity building activities in terms of detection activities and identification activities, covering both traditional analysis methods as well as innovative approaches by focusing on practical training in laboratories is something very important. Exploring the possibility of creating links with these centers on the prevention of biotechnological risks with the use of industrial databases We should also facilitate capacity building in the field of access to information through the Center on Newly Developed LMOs. Encourage developers of new technologies to, in a transparent manner, share information regarding methods for identifying newly developed living modified organisms. One should strengthen frameworks for cooperation through their creation or by support being given to regional networks of laboratories. Finally, Madam, Africa would like to underscore that capacity building and technology transfer are both essential for the effective detection of living modified organisms in developing states. For this reason, there is a need to, in addition to technical and practical training in laboratories, to also take into account assistance in terms of infrastructure and equipment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Togo, on behalf of Africa. Next on the list is Belgium, followed by Mexico.
Dear Madam Chair, thank you for giving us the floor. Belgium wants to highlight the importance of the network of laboratories regarding the new techniques for the detection and identification of LMOs, and proposes some text changes as well as a new paragraph to stress this. We support the proposal to not revise the training manual on detection and identification of LMOs, but find it important to complement the manual with new findings on digital PCR and next-generation sequencing. We acknowledge the importance of promising and advancing approaches of new techniques for detection and identification, such as digital PCR, and propose to add a paragraph to the draft recommendation to stress this. We prefer to make use of existing tools within the Biosafety Clearinghouse instead of launching new initiatives, and also propose text on this under 4A. Finally, we have some editorial comments to align the text of the recommendation with the structure of COP-MOP decisions in the past and regarding some wording. Comments will be submitted in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Belgium. Mexico, followed by Indonesia.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Chair. Mexico supports the proposal, or the draft proposal for COP-MOP for the Cartagena Protocol in order to add to technical guidance on biosecurity and safety. We asked for confirmation of laboratory networks to extend the scope for the identification of LMOs, continue compiling publications and materials for technical resources to improve their inclusion and the access to interchange of information on biotechnology, both in English and in other languages. We believe it's important to have continuity in the development of workshops, exchanges of information, and the updating of new methods for detection, identification of LMOs, which supports the process to consolidate capacities of parties to implement new methodologies for detection and identification of LMOs. As mentioned by the previous delegation, digital PCR. We also want to highlight the importance of public and private developers of LMOs to provide and make available related information on the precise methodologies of modification, exact regions for modified genomes, analyses of the LMOs, whether it's genomic, epigenomic, proteomic, or metanomic, and the results of analyses made. Chair, based on the precautionary principle and the importance of applying it in the assessment of risks associated with new biotechnologies, Mexico supports including socioeconomic considerations, although these are optional according to the Cartagena Protocol. They are essential to assess the impacts of biotechnology in food security and socioeconomic equity, in particular in developing countries. 2, we want to reiterate the respect for human rights in all decisions related to biotechnology, ensuring the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples, local communities, and other interested stakeholders in decision-making processes related to biotechnology, in line with Article 8J. 3, set out ethical principles for free science, free from conflict of interest in assessing risks linked to biotechnology. Chair, taking all that into account and in line with what's been said, we have prepared some comments on the text itself, which we will send to the Secretariat in writing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mexico. The next on the list is Indonesia, followed by Germany.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our delegation is of the view that the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety Technical Series 5 on training manual on the detections and identifications of LMO in the context of the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety continues to be pertinent for applications. Nevertheless, Chair, our delegations believe that there are several pertinent points that needs to be conducted as follows. First, enhancing the network of laboratories, particularly for the identifications and detections of LMO. This initiative is crucial for improving the capacity of laboratory and human resources to bridge the existing gaps among parties countries. Second, with regard to Section 5, Recommendations Point 1, Indonesia would like to seek clarifications on the operationalizations and mechanism of sharing through Biosafety Clearinghouse regarding the technical reference materials. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Indonesia. Germany, you have the floor, followed by Colombia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The ability to detect and identify living modified organisms is an essential element in the implementation of the Cartagena Protocol, as it allows for controlling and monitoring transboundary movements of LMOs. Advancements in new techniques bear promising approaches to either facilitate standard LMO analytics or enable detecting and identifying newly developed and unauthorized LMOs. However, those new techniques are still in the stage of research and development and are not fit to be implemented in routine analytics. Therefore, Germany considers that an update of the training manual is not needed at this time. The current version is relevant and useful. Nevertheless, information on the use of advanced new analytical techniques could complement the training manual, and Germany supports the invitation to share related technical reference materials and publications within the Biosafety Clearinghouse. To prominently publish those materials, we suggest to use the already existing resource section of the Sampling, Detection and Identification Forum. Madam Chair, information sharing is important, but even more important is making practical use of it. Therefore, we strongly support language on the need to strengthen the infrastructure for the detection and identification of LMOs and to support the formation of international and regional networks. From our experience, such networks are beneficial and enhance capacities to detect and identify LMOs. Furthermore, scientific exchange is important. In this regard, we are pleased about the participation of more than 400 experts from 55 countries at the International Conference of GMO Analysis and New Genomic Techniques that was held in Germany in 2023. The conference was organized in cooperation of German and EU government institutions and the CBD Secretariat. We will submit our amendments to the draft recommendation in writing. Furthermore, we support the interventions made by Belgium. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Germany. Colombia, you have the floor, followed by Uganda.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Chair. Colombia would like to thank the Secretariat for the work carried out for document Substa 26.6 and other related documents, and also thank the parties who contributed with relevant information, including their experiences with LMOs and new detection technologies. We believe that the work of SUBSTA on this agenda item in the priority framework for COP16 is of great relevance, enables us to identify needs and strengthen technical capacities of parties when it comes to ensuring an adequate level of protection in terms of the safe use of LMOs, which could have adverse effects on conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and their potential link to impacts on the health of ecosystems and food security, among other issues. Colombia believes that technical series on biosafety number 5 continues to be relevant and has enabled us to move forward in detection of LMOs at the national level. And we recommend continuing the work to include information on new detection technologies and techniques and identification techniques and new developments in techniques which have been used by developing countries in line with their capacities. In addition, it's important to recognize the limitations faced by developing countries when it comes to accessing available information on new detection and identification technologies for LMOs, which have recently been created and those which aren't authorized in addition. Colombia believes that we need to adopt concrete commitments to promote collaboration between parties, measures to improve access and the exchange of information, and the implementation of regional laboratory networks. Finally, Colombia will be ready to actively take part in the creation of recommendations throughout the SUBSTA meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Colombia. Uganda, you have the floor, followed by Malawi.
Thank you, Chairperson. Uganda supports the position of Africa made by Togo in regard to item 7 entitled Detection and Identification of Living Modified Organisms. Uganda calls for strengthened capacity building both at infrastructural, technical aspects, especially with emerging technologies for advancement of quality assurance, including development, validation, harmonization, and standardization of means and methods for sampling, detection, identification, and quantification of living modified organisms. Uganda calls for collaboration and partnerships with regional network of laboratories, especially in detection and quantification of living modified organisms. Further, Uganda calls on the network of laboratories for the detection and identification of living modified organisms to share through the biosafety clearinghouse technical reference materials and publications related to digital polymerase chain reaction and next generation sequencing in order to complement Biosafety Technical Series 5, technical manual on detection and identification of living modified organisms in the context of the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
Thank you, Uganda, very much. Malawi, you have the floor, followed by Nigeria.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Malawi aligns itself with the statement by Togo on behalf of Africa. We appreciate the advancement in technologies for detection and identification of living modified organisms, such as the digital PCR and the next generation sequencing, which, according to the information provided, are more efficient in detecting unauthorized LMOs, as highlighted in documents CBD-Substa/26/6. Malawi is concerned with the high cost of these advanced technologies, which will hinder accessibility of such beneficial techniques, especially for most developing countries. We therefore propose that deliberate effort must be made by the Secretariat to facilitate the establishment of partnership between developed and developing parties that will promote knowledge sharing and capacity building on new LMO detection techniques and access to the consumables for such techniques. Malawi is also supporting the proposed solution to address the current gaps identified for detection and identification of LMOs. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Malawi. Nigeria, you have the floor, followed by Zimbabwe.
Madam Chair, thank you. Nigeria supports the statement made by Togo on behalf of the African group regarding the detection and identification of living modified organisms, LMOs. Nigeria supports the collaboration between national and regional laboratories. However, financial resources are needed to strengthen the infrastructure for the detection and identification of living modified organisms, the formation of regional networks of laboratories and capacity building activities. Furthermore, we urge the Secretariat to continue its commendable efforts in collaborating with relevant organizations. This collaboration should aim to provide comprehensive capacity building support to the parties involved in detecting and identifying living modified organisms. The benefits of this support include sharing best practices, facilitating hands-on training programs, and fostering knowledge exchange. And Nigeria also supports the intervention and the reports by Belgium and Germany, as we also request the Secretariat to encourage the submission of reference materials and publications related to digital PCR and next-generation sequencing, which are emerging as new tools for the detection and identification of LMOs. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Nigeria. Zimbabwe, you have the floor, followed by France.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Zimbabwe supports the statement made by Togo on behalf of the Africa Group. It is important to update the training manual on the detection and identification of living modified organisms to include newly developed living modified organisms. In our view, capacity building in terms of skills, knowledge transfer, and infrastructure is required for laboratories to improve their capacity in detecting and identifying newly developed and unauthorized LMOs. Additionally, capacity is required for employing new techniques for detecting and identifying LMOs. Finally, existing regional networks of laboratories in the field of LMO detection and identification should be supported. For example, the Southern Africa Network of GMO Detection Laboratories. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Zimbabwe. France, you have the floor, followed by Italy.
Merci. Thank you, Chair. My statement will be brief. France supports the statement made by Belgium and Germany. In particular, we support the relevance and usefulness of the current version of the training manual on the detection and identification of LMOs, as there is no, in our opinion, extensive new information to be added to the training manual. We believe that an update is not needed nor useful at this time. We support, in addition, the invitation to share additional material on digital PCR and next-generation sequencing in order to complement the manual with additional information. We think the potential of these techniques could be mentioned in the preamble paragraphs of the draft recommendation. We have additional suggestions of amendments to the draft recommendation, which we will send in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Franz. Italy, you have the floor, followed by Sweden.
Dear Madam Chair, thank you for giving us the floor. Italy supports the Belgium statement on this item, and in particular, Italy wishes to highlight the importance of the network of laboratories for the new techniques for the detection and identification of LMOs. Italy supports the proposal to not revise the training manual on detection and identification of LMOs, but finds it important to complement it along the lines of what Belgium proposed. Italy fully understands the importance of finding and implementing new techniques for detection and identifications of LMOs. Therefore, Italy supports the proposition of adding a paragraph to the draft recommendation along those lines. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Italy. Sweden, you have the floor, followed by Peru.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. Sweden supports the statement by Belgium under this agenda item. We recognize the importance of the network of laboratories for the detection and identification of living modified organisms, and would like to highlight their role in recommendation more. We also note with appreciation the promising and advancing approaches of new techniques for detection and identification of LMO. We also want to emphasize the importance of parties sharing information through biosafety clearinghouse. However, we should fully make use of existing tools of the clearinghouse before introducing new ones. We will submit our comments to the Secretary in writing for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Sweden. Peru, you have the floor, followed by Brazil.
Muchas gracias, señora.
Thank you very much, Chair. Peru would like to thank the Secretariat for the drafting of the document, which contains information on the activities conducted during the intersessional period under the Working Group on Detection and Identification of LMOs, and online discussions on the laboratory network, amongst other things. Peru supports the recommendation for the Biosafety Technical Series 5, continues to be relevant and useful for the detection and identification of LMOs. But we need to compile information and experiences on new methods of detection and identification of LMOs. Digital PCR and digital sequencing in particular, in order to update the training manual, paragraph 30.1 and 30.4. In addition, Peru suggests allocating resources for the production and dissemination of reference materials for certification of LMOs, in particular those recently authorized, which are key for the implementation and approval of detection protocols and identical protocols for LMOs, the development of calibration curves, amongst other things. That's paragraph 30.4. On CBD, documents 26/6, in section 5, we see information draft recommendations, and we would like to support those. Thank you.
Thank you, Peru. Brazil, you have the floor, followed by Switzerland.
Thank you, Madam. Brazil supports most of the proposed text on detection and identification of living modified organisms. We will be sending some few comments in writing expressly stating that detection and identification should be focused on LMOs that may have adverse effects on the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity, in line with the objectives of the protocol. Furthermore, we fully support the invitation for parties and international organizations to provide financial resources to laboratories to strengthen the infrastructure for the detection and identification of LMOs. We are of the view that this should be directed especially to developing countries, and will be making suggestions to that effect. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Brazil. Switzerland, you have the floor, followed by South Africa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Switzerland would like to emphasize that the detection and identification of living modified organisms is crucial for the implementation of the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety and is also relevant for other issues such as those related to synthetic biology. Therefore, efforts should be made towards overcoming the challenges related to detection and identification of living modified organisms developed with new gene technologies. In this sense, we welcome the synthesis of information provided by the Secretariat, as well as the work of the network of laboratories for the detection and identification of LMOs, which is facilitating exchange of experience, sharing of information, and building of expertise in the field. This exchange can be key in order to be able to know what has been genetically modified, which can enable detection and identification of the concerned LMOs. Switzerland generally agrees with the proposal of the document Substa 26.6. We have some amendment suggestion regarding the recommendation that we will provide in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. South Africa, you have the floor, followed by Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you, Madam Chair. South Africa supports the statement made by Togo on behalf of Africa. We note the online discussions of the network of laboratories, in particular the diversity in membership of the networks and the varied levels of experience and challenges in the field of detection and identification of LMOs, including for newly developed and unauthorized LMOs. South Africa notes that the access to reference material and relevant information for new developments in this field remains a challenge. Therefore, we invite parties and other governments, relevant organizations, and the networks to make reference materials and relevant information available and to share experiences in this regard, including for newly developed LMOs. And South Africa recognizes the crucial role that regional networks of laboratories play in facilitating knowledge sharing and addressing gaps in capacity, as well as harmonizing and standardizing methodologies for the sampling, detection, identification, and quantification of LMOs. South Africa therefore supports the formation of regional networks of laboratories and the strengthening of capacities in undertaking detection and identification. And that capacity building activities should include hands-on training of laboratory personnel on both traditional analytical methods and new detection techniques. Lastly, Madam Chair, South Africa invites international organizations and requests the Global Environment Facility to provide financial resources to support activities aimed at strengthening infrastructure, regional networks of laboratories, and capacity building as part of implementing the relevant goals of the new implementation plan and capacity building action plan for the biosafety protocol. We will submit our text proposals in this regard. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, South Africa. Syrian Arab Republic, followed by Kenya.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I should like to thank the Secretariat for the preparation of this document, Substa 26/6. Madam Chair, detecting LMOs is a very important element with regard to Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. It needs a lot of training and qualifications, and this training should be sustainable and continuous. It also needs continuous improvement of the infrastructures of the laboratories that are used in detecting LMOs. This needs huge financial resources that are above the capabilities of developing countries. Therefore, Madam Chair, we request the Secretariat to carry out all the efforts in order to provide the necessary training for the developing countries, as well as the establishment of partnerships, as well as technical institutions that are in charge of LMOs detection. Especially that there are developing countries that are suffering from the lack of trained personnel or qualified laboratories. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Syrian Arab Republic. Kenya, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Kenya is in support of the statement made by Togo on behalf of the African group on the agenda item of LMO detection. in view of the rapid emergence of newly developed living modified organisms, including stacked gene events with multiple traits, and in view of new detection techniques, though the technical series number 5 is still relevant at this point in time, Kenya is of the view that update of the manual should continue. Kenya, therefore, urges technology developers and the network of laboratories to fast-track the standardization, optimization, and validation of new detection methods, such as the digital PCR, and next-generation sequencing, and isothermal amplification techniques, which are still at experimental phase, to complement the existing training manual on the detection and identification of living modified organisms. Kenya emphasizes the need for inventory taking of existing laboratories, establishment of well-equipped regional LMO testing and reference laboratories, identification of existing gaps in the detection and identification of LMOs, capacity enhancement for the detection of LMOs, particularly in developing countries and countries in transition. Finally, Madam Chair, Kenya calls for timely sharing of information on activities of the network of laboratories through the Biosafety Clearinghouse for expedited information exchange. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Kenya. I will give a floor to Saudi Arabia and close the list of speakers. Saudi Arabia, we have the floor.
شكرا سيدة الرئيسة.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. We back and agree with the importance of this topic, namely the detection and identification of living modified organisms, especially as these organisms are of critical importance for the nutritional and food safety of a great many countries. We are facing a great many challenges when it comes to a lack of knowledge and technologies when it comes to detecting and identifying such organisms in developing states. Now, there shouldn't be a commercial aspect to all this. What is important here is to bear in mind the humane and humanitarian side of things. And for this reason, we call upon all the states around the world to help those who don't possess the necessary capacities and to do so through international cooperation. I thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much, Saudi Arabia, for your statement. Now, I would like to give a floor to 221, indigenous peoples.
Dear Chair, I'm speaking on the behalf of IFB. We thanks the Secretariat for the preparation of the document. The detection, techniques, and identification methods of living modified organisms are more complex, sophisticated, and are not well known by the indigenous peoples and local communities. We are aware that the LMO-related information, the new detection, and the identification techniques are limited and lack a clear mechanism for authorization. Such technology may cause adverse impacts to biodiversity and on indigenous peoples and local community. Therefore, the IFP proposed that the Agikun voluntary guidelines related to the culture, environment, social and ethics, impact assessment, and Article 26 under the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety related to socioeconomic impacts are taken into account. We also propose that the human rights-based approach, free, prior, and informed consent, full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local community, and other precautionary approaches are taken into account the consideration. Furthermore, we have some comments. with the potential negative impacts on indigenous peoples and local community, we would like to add just after the living modified organisms. Indigenous peoples and local community would like to add the relevant organization after this. As a cultural appropriate, we would like to just in front of the capacity building with full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local community would like to add just after the capacity building activity. Indigenous peoples, local community, women and youth would like to add after the parties. We submit the text to the Secretary. We would like to request party to support. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your statement. Is there support from parties for this statement? There is support from Democratic Republic of Congo. And I think Zimbabwe. The delegates, we have completed the first reading of agenda item 7, detection and identification of living modified organisms. On the basis of your statements and supports, with help of Secretariat, I will prepare conference room paper. I remind you to submit your written comments within 1 hour after the close of this session. Dear delegates, I would like to ask you to take your seats. We will now turn our attention to item 8, marine and coastal biodiversity. We have two sub-items under item 8 that will be taken together. A, ecologically or biologically significant marine areas, further work, and B, conservation and sustainable use of marine and coastal biodiversity. I now invite the Secretariat to introduce item 8.
Thank you, Chair. For item 8A, the Secretariat has prepared pre-session document 7/add1, which focuses on the issue of modalities for modifying the descriptions of ecologically or biologically significant marine areas, or EBSAs, and describing new EBSAs. It is complemented by the reports of the 2 expert workshops that were held in support of this agenda item, as well as information document number 7. For item 8B, the Secretariat has prepared pre-session document 7, which addresses, among other issues, gaps and areas in need of additional focus under the Convention to support the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework with regards to marine, coastal, and island biodiversity, and potential options for modalities for collaboration and cooperation with relevant global and regional organizations in the context of the agreement under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, commonly referred to as the BBNJ Agreement. This document is complemented by information documents numbers 8, 9, and 10. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. As you have noted, there are some issues of a legal and political nature in the draft recommendations on EBSAs, which do not seem to be within the mandate of the subsidiary body to discuss. I suggest we defer this matter for the consideration of COP16. I trust this way forward is acceptable. We will take interventions on the 2 sub-items at the same time. In order to assist the Secretariat to follow your interventions, it will be important to be very clear about the sub-item A or B on which you are commenting. This will help the audience to understand your comments and assist the Secretariat in their efforts to capture your comments. I remind you that I will be limiting statements to 5 minutes for regional groups, 3 minutes for parties, 4 minutes for IPLCs and major stakeholder groups, and 2 minutes for non-parties and observers, time permitting. Following interventions by observers, I will give a brief chance for parties that may wish to comment or support any specific proposal made by observers. Please focus on the essential points and submit the full text of your intervention to the Secretariat no later than 1 hour after the close of session. Please note, however, that your key points especially those that you would like to have reflected in the draft recommendations, should be read out in the room. I now open the floor for interventions on item 8, sub-items A and B. I will now give the floor to Argentina, followed by Indonesia.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. Había solicitado.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I had asked the floor to present a motion. Could I do this before I speak to agenda item 8? Now, I heard your proposal. However, Argentina is not ready at this point to postpone the consideration of legal issues all the way to COP16, which will take place as late as October. We believe that political issues are technical in nature as well, and for this reason they are included and should be included on the agenda of our meeting. This is what we see in document 7-1, a document which was approved by all participants. Thank you.
Thank you, Argentina.
Disculpas.
Thank you, Argentina, very much. Which one?
Into other languages? Of the last point.
No.
No, I heard the English came. Oh, you were speaking English. Yeah, from English.
Also, they can say it again.
Yes.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
Can you continue in English? Microphone to Argentina, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think there must have been a misunderstanding because the translation into English did not say what I conveyed in Spanish, so I will just convey my message in English. So at this time, Argentina is not in a position to accept that the legal matters that are included in this document are deferred to COP16. We consider that legal matters are technical matters, and furthermore, the document as is was adopted for discussion when we agreed to the agenda and the work program for this SABSTA meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Argentina. It was translated, it was understood, and it is accepted. Please continue with your intervention.
Señora Presidenta, la Argentina.
Chair, Argentina would like to thank the expert group for the legal and technical workshops, for examining modalities for the modification of the description of marine areas of biological or ecological importance and create new areas. We express our satisfaction with the draft decision included in the document CBD-Live 26/7 and 1. In the discussions in the workshops, we saw significant progress made. Argentina would like to highlight in particular the focus set out in the legal expert group to broach concerns on claims or disputes relating to sovereignty, sovereign rights, or jurisdictions. The draft decision constitutes a solid foundation to move towards consensus, and we hope that SABSTA we'll be able to submit it to COP with a clean text for consideration. We trust in the commitment of parties to achieve this objective. In this regard, we recall that this topic has been discussed for several years without achieving consensus, and now we have an essential opportunity to improve on this. On this, then, we have the obligation to spare no effort in this session to bring our positions together and broach legal topics as necessary, and ensure that we also cover all necessary technical aspects. It's our responsibility as parties to try and resolve any issues in order to ensure the success of the COP. On the draft recommendation in document CBD subset 26/7, Argentina believes that the implementation of programs of work on marine and coastal biodiversity and biodiversity of islands requires the provision of financial resources, technology transfer, creation and development of capacities for developing countries. In addition, Argentina believes or welcomes initiatives such as those proposed in the operative paragraph 8. Scientific and technical knowledge of CDB can be valuable for B&J. At the same time, we need to take into account that's the first meeting of the priority meeting of the agreement, where we will discuss modalities for their implementation, should be held by the end of June this year. In this regard, it's necessary to have a clear landscape of how this process will continue in order to establish significant cooperation. We will submit all of our comments in writing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Argentina, you have been given additional time because of your point of order. I will continue with Indonesia, followed by Canada.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Indonesia extends its appreciations for the outcomes of the technical and legal expert workshop from EPSA, which have successfully compiled a draft of technical aspects and legal aspects for modifying and descriptions of EPSA in the new areas. This effort takes into consideration the latest developments and global agreements, with particular emphasis on the BBNG agreement. However, our delegation identifies at least 4 areas of concern that warrant further attention in the process of modifying the description and establishing the new EPSA applicable within national jurisdiction, transboundary jurisdiction, and BNG areas beyond national jurisdictions as follows. First, the consideration of the state's sovereignty in the establishment and modifications of EPSA within national jurisdiction area. Second, the need for a transparent and inclusive consultative process in the establishment and modification of EPSA within the transboundary jurisdiction areas and EPSA that will relate it to the national jurisdiction. The third, the need to promote prioritization of the latest data and information of EPSA to be placed in the repository. In this regard, we can ensure that the outdated information will not be used inappropriately. Fourth, encourage member states to retain the option to modify existing EPSA in the repository and transfer them into the information sharing mechanism. Furthermore, I would like to inform the plenary that Indonesia has signed the BBNG agreement and we are in the ratification process. On that note, Indonesia encourages other member states to sign this important new agreement and to follow the mechanism within the BBNG agreement. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Indonesia, and congratulations. Canada, you have the floor, followed by Japan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm commenting on item 8A. Canada would like to thank the CBD Secretariat for their work in organizing the collaborative and productive expert workshops held in November of last year, and for preparing the documents, including the expert workshop reports and the draft recommendation for this meeting. Canada welcomes and supports the draft decision prepared by the Secretariat with very minor changes to the preambular text and to the annex. Canada supports the practical options provided in the annex to further enhance scientific methodologies and approaches on the description and modification of marine areas meeting the EBSA criteria, and would like to recommend the inclusion of Indigenous knowledge in a few key paragraphs of the annex, namely 1B1, 3A, 8, 13. And we'd like to ensure that Indigenous peoples are invited to collaborate in the implementation of the modalities with their free, prior, and informed consent, which is an addition we would like to see in operative paragraph 6. Canada strongly supports and encourages other parties to support without further delays the streamlined modalities provided in the annex to the draft decision to facilitate processes to describe new EBSAs in the remaining 25% of the global ocean, and in particular in areas beyond national jurisdiction, and to help ensure existing EBSA descriptions can be updated with new research and data. Canada strongly supports the role of EBSAs in informing management approaches critical to protecting marine biodiversity, and as such, Canada advocates for the use of EBSAs in the context of fast-tracking international efforts to meet Target 3 of the Global Biodiversity Framework, especially in areas beyond national jurisdiction where only 1% of the ocean is currently protected. Lastly, given the BBNJ agreement's complementarity to the Convention and considering the important role EBSAs can play in providing scientific support for the implementation of the BBNJ agreement, Canada supports the need for coherence, coordination, and collaboration between the CBD and the BBNJ agreement and other relevant bodies governing the ocean space beyond national jurisdiction. Canada will provide its specific textual changes in writing to the CBD Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. Japan, you have the floor, followed by Mexico.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Regarding agenda item 8A, further work on EBSAs, Japan has 3 comments. First, Japan would like to reiterate that the modification of description of EBSA and the description of new areas are carried out as scientific and technical exercises. Second, if a state proposes new areas as EBSAs within its own maritime areas where borders and maritime boundaries have not yet been delimited with the states concerned, Japan believes the state must allow other countries to be consulted and make suggestions for concerned adjustments as necessary. For such purposes, we believe it will be useful to have a forum where multiple parties concerned who share the boundaries, biosphere, and territories can discuss based on scientific scope. Finally, Japan considers it is important that the submission and decision of a modification and description of EBSAs in areas beyond national jurisdiction are carried out based on the scientific evidence and cooperation and collaboration with a competent intergovernmental organization such as regional fisheries bodies and FAO are very important. And also, I'm going to make intervention on item 8B. Japan has also 3 comments. First of all, Japan welcomes the adoption of the BBNJ agreement. Second, with regard to the gaps and the areas in need of additional focus under the Convention on Marine and Coastal Biodiversity, duplication with existing tools and guidance should be avoided, and new guidance should be developed only where there are clear gaps exist, as there is not much time left to implement the GBF, and effective tools and guidance are already provided by CBD, relevant international organizations such as FAO and coastal states. Finally, Japan recognizes the necessity of the organization of the joint expert workshop which is contained in the paragraph 8 of the recommendation of the draft substance 26/7. And we believe it is very important to have RFP and FAO and relevant international organizations to have very effective and successful meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Japan. Mexico, you have the floor, followed by Zimbabwe.
Gracias.
Thank you, Chair. Mexico supports the proposal to recommend to the COP as set out in the document, and we welcome the adoption of the agreement under the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea on the sustainable use of marine resources in areas beyond national jurisdiction, BB&J. We also take note of the need to develop new capacities in the framework of the work on coastal marine diversity and the working group on island biodiversity. In this regard, capacity building, the exchange of experiences, and the strengthening of collaboration between United Nations bodies or other intergovernmental bodies and regional bodies is essential. We reiterate the need to apply the precautionary principle in all activities with a potential risk for biodiversity and human health. In line with that said before, Mexico reiterates its position to restrict marine bioengineering projects in line with the Convention of London and its protocols on marine bioengineering and its potential impacts on marine and coastal biodiversity. On EBSAs, Mexico agrees in adopting the modalities for their amendment and the description of new areas. Nevertheless, we think it will be necessary to carry out future work related to the coexistence between EBSAs and BB&Js. We need to ensure communication between both instruments and competent authorities to ensure there is no duplication of work or contradictory decisions within the same marine space. We have specific comments and amendments or additions to the draft recommendation for the COP, and one comment to include women and the youth in paragraph 3A of the EBSA's document, but we will send all these in writing to Secretariat. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Mexico. Zimbabwe, you have the floor, followed by Maldives.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The statement is on agenda item 8B. Zimbabwe makes this statement on behalf of the Africa Group. Madam Chair, Africa would like to thank the Secretariat for the work done in the preparation of document CBD-Live 26/7 and the associated information documents which provide valuable guidance on potential options for modalities, collaboration, and cooperation, as well as strategic review and analysis of the program of work on island marine and coastal biodiversity in the context of the GBMF. Africa generally values the importance of sustainable use of wild species to ensure global conservation. Hence, appreciate the importance of conserving marine and coastal biodiversity, as well as strengthening of cross-sector cooperation and collaboration amongst all multilateral environmental agreements and stakeholders towards achieving the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework goals and targets. Africa appreciates and fully supports the Convention on Biological Diversity's approach to go beyond national jurisdictions and cover biodiversity conservation and regulation of sustainable use of marine and coastal biodiversity as well. It is important to note that island, marine, and coastal ecosystems are not spared from the threats such as unsustainable harvesting, pollution,
climate change, and ocean acidification. Hence, existing relevant approaches to biodiversity conservation must be applied to all. It is important to stress the importance of using best available science and incorporating traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples and local communities in further closing identified gaps. Africa further calls for cooperation and support, especially on capacity development, technology transfer, marine spatial planning, inclusive participation of indigenous peoples and local communities, women, youth, and other vulnerable members of the community, creation of synergies or other cooperative arrangements with other multilateral environmental agreements and other competent organizations. Africa also calls for promoting exchanges and sharing of experiences between experts and all stakeholders on the conservation and sustainable use of marine and coastal biodiversity. Madam Chair, Africa is aware of the ongoing negotiations on plastic pollution and look forward to the adoption of the international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution and requests that the issues of marine environment, particularly marine pollution, be given adequate attention. Africa therefore welcomes the agreement under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, mindful of the fact that frequent reviews should be done as more lessons are learned during implementation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Zimbabwe, on behalf of Africa. Maldives, you have the floor, followed by Malaysia. And I will ask parties, please continue to refer to the sub-item in your interventions.
Thank you, Chair. Maldives, being an island nation with a vast ocean area, welcomes document Substar 26.7 on marine and coastal biodiversity. We thank the Secretariat and experts for undertaking strategic reviews and analysis of the programs of work on marine and coastal biodiversity and on island biodiversity. We are optimistic that with the draft recommendations present in the document, there will be more guidance and pragmatic ways identified that will bring small island developing states who are dependent, that will benefit small island developing states who are dependent on coastal and marine ecosystems. Yesterday, the Maldives Parliament approved the ratification of BBNJ, and we will be submitting the instrument of ratification soon. We seek synergies, collaboration, and cooperation under BBNJ and CBD to achieve results that would benefit island states. Based on our experience in conservation of coastal and marine areas, there are certain areas that could be added to the annex of the document, which would make the marine and coastal biodiversity and island programs stronger. For example, while it is important to enhance ecological restoration, for Maldives we also need to understand the coverage of degraded ecosystems and where restoration needs to be focused. And while there is a need to improve the use of area-based conservation measures, there is also a need to identify already existing other effective area-based conservation measures and improvement of the effectiveness of existing area-based conservation measures. We also want to highlight the impacts of transboundary pollution on island states. Additionally, we want to highlight the need for identification of specific blue carbon ecosystems in island states, along with the management of them as given in the annex. Maldives also has endorsed the Global Ecosystem Atlas initiative convened by the Group of Earth Observations, which will provide a reliable data source for harmonized and cohesive monitoring, reporting, and verification efforts under the GBF and beyond. This initiative has started a pilot project in the Maldives, which will facilitate the creation of the first comprehensive ecosystem map for the Maldives. We therefore want to include the importance of ecosystem mapping and building of capacity in that regard with elements on ocean accounting and marine spatial planning. We will provide these specific changes in writing. Maldives also welcomes the document CBD/Substar/26/7 Ed 1 on further work on ecologically and biologically significant marine areas. We support the adoption of the modalities for the modification of descriptions of ecologically or biologically significant marine areas and the description of new areas contained in the annex. We also want to highlight the importance of collaborations between other similar processes that are scientific in nature in recognizing areas within and beyond national jurisdiction. For example, information and data used for the recognition of important shark and ray areas and important marine mammal areas under the Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species could be used for the description of ecologically and biologically significant marine areas, especially in the context of Maldives. This could also help in development of national and regional conservation plans and strategies focused either on specific species or specific ecosystems. We therefore see
Maldives.
opportunities for...
May I ask you to conclude your intervention?
Thank you, Chair. That was the end of the statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Maldives. Malaysia, followed by Iceland.
Thank you, Chair. Malaysia appreciates the work by the Secretariat in producing the current document 26.7 at 1 on further work on ecologically or biologically significant marine areas, which contains the draft decision and the modality. There is no doubt that a lot of efforts has been put into this as it is better framed compared to the document produced for Substar 24. Pursuant to Decision 15/26, the Executive Secretary was requested to convene 2 expert workshops to review the technical and legal aspects of the modality as elaborated in the current document. The workshop was very productive in providing inputs for this document. Therefore, Malaysia would like to express our gratitude to the Secretariat and to parties who had made it possible. Malaysia also appreciates the webinar and the informal advisory group meeting organized by the Secretariat prior to Substar 26, which has also helped to provide clarity to the proposed modality. Malaysia commits to work with parties to iron out outstanding issues. And Malaysia also agrees to the proposal to extend the term of the informal advisory group on EPSA. Additionally, Malaysia would like to propose an operative paragraph as there were concerns on whether this modality has considered all technical and legal aspects. So to address this concern, our proposed text is request the Executive Secretary to facilitate review of the modality and its effectiveness after 5 years of implementation. We hope that this would help to ease palatability of the modality, because this modality may not be the perfect modality, but Malaysia believes that it should not be used as a hindrance for the finalization of this modality and for parties to move forward. On agenda item 8B, Malaysia would like to thank the Secretariat for the work in identifying gaps in areas in need for additional focus in producing the document to be deliberated for recommendation to COP16. Malaysia do have textual proposals, and we will submit our proposals in writing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Malaysia. Iceland, you have the floor, followed by Seychelles.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm addressing item 8A. Iceland supports adoption of the suggested recommendation, including the annex on the modalities for modification and new descriptions of EPSAs. I would like to recall that the Convention initiated this process 20 years ago in Kuala Lumpur in 2004 and adopted the criteria for the EPSA descriptions in Brazil 2 years later. The process has inspired discussions and advanced nature conservation in a marine area enormously, especially on marine protected areas. Since the first EPSA workshop, we have developed descriptions of over 300 EPSAs in the open ocean and regional seas. During these 20 years, the United Nations initiated consultations on and finalized a new agreement on the conservation of sustainable use and biological diversity in areas beyond national jurisdictions, starting with the first preparation preparatory process in February 2005 and finalizing the agreement text at the end of June last year. Close to 100 states have signed and 5 have already ratified the agreement of the 60s needed for the BBNJ to enter into force. When that happens, we will have a process to consider the EPSA descriptions transferred to the repository, to initiate actions to continue the work to set up a network of MPAs in the oceans towards a 30 by 30 target. Therefore, it's crucial that we adopt the modalities for the modifications of EPSA descriptions at this meeting. Madam Chair, Iceland fully supports the suggestion to renew the informal advisory group for 2 years in accordance with paragraph 3 of Annex 3 and Decision 13/12, as well as the explanatory paragraphs of the recommendation in para 3 and para 7. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Iceland. Seychelles, you have the floor, followed by South Africa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Seychelles is making this statement on agenda item 8B and supports the statement made by Zimbabwe on behalf of the African Group. Seychelles welcomes document CBD/Substat 26/7 and would like to support the draft COP recommendation on marine and coastal biodiversity. We also appreciate the ongoing capacity building and support the need for further capacity building to address the issues facing marine and coastal biodiversity. Moreover, we encourage knowledge sharing and sharing of best practices amongst countries. Seychelles also welcomes the need for continuous synergies and collaboration with other initiatives, multilateral agreements, especially the work undertaken under the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development and the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration towards scientific research. Scientific research is of utmost importance for conservation and to ensure effective management. We encourage and promote scientific research in the marine and coastal ecosystem and stress upon technology transfer to developing countries, in particular least developing countries and small island developing states. We also appreciate the work done by the Secretariat to look at the areas of focus and options for modalities for collaboration and cooperation with relevant global and regional organizations in the context of the BBNJ Treaty. However, we take note of the programs of work on marine and coastal biodiversity and on island biodiversity that have not been fully implemented and stress that further work be undertaken to ensure implementation of this program of work. Moreover, we welcome the annex addressing the gaps and areas in need of additional focus that will support the implementation of the KMGBF and urges the Executive Secretary to undertake further work to address these gaps. We would like to put emphasis on certain key elements that has been included in the annex in relation to island biodiversity. Firstly, invasive alien species, which is one of the main threats to island biodiversity, and the need for eradication or control of invasive alien species in areas of high biodiversity. Furthermore, plastic pollution in the marine environment is of major threats to marine and coastal biodiversity, including island biodiversity. Marine pollution is a transboundary issue, which deserves further attention, but also taking into consideration the ongoing negotiations on the UN Treaty to end plastic pollution. Moreover, blue carbon ecosystems does not only need to be managed, but restored and ensure that they are being conserved so that they may provide the necessary ecosystem services. Also, there is a need for further research on ocean acidification and how it impacts marine and coastal ecosystems. And lastly, we not only need to increase the ambition on the percentage of effective restoration, but there is a need to support these restoration initiatives either through capacity building, resource mobilization, or through technology transfer. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Seychelles. South Africa, followed by Nepal.
Thank you, Chair. South Africa makes this statement on behalf of Africa Group. Africa take note with appreciation further work on ecologically or biologically significant marine areas. We thank the Secretariat and the governments of Norway, Belgium, Canada, Germany, and Sweden.
Sorry, South Africa, I have a question for you. You already had Zimbabwe for regional statement on behalf of Africa.
I'm making this statement, Chairperson, under agenda item 8A on further work on ecological or biologically significant marine areas.
Thank you very much. Please continue.
We thank the Secretariat and the governments of Norway, Belgium, Canada, Germany, and Sweden for the workshop held in Oslo in November 2023 to review the outstanding technical and legal issues of the modalities for modifying the description of EBSAs and describing new areas. South Africa and other Africa countries, including Namibia and Angola, have done considerable work to modify descriptions of EBSAs in marine and coastal areas and to describe new EBSAs. These descriptions are key to informing area-based management measures, including marine spatial planning, protected area expansion, and recognition of other effective area-based conservation measures in our region. As such, South Africa, on behalf of Africa, is hopeful that the proposed modalities for modifying EBSAs and describing new EBSAs will be adopted at COP16. The annex to the draft decision containing the modalities have been reviewed and found to be generally fair reflection of the technical and legal workshop proceedings. We take note and strongly support that only EBSA descriptions that have been considered and endorsed by the Conference of Parties are to be contained in the repository. We would like to point out, however, that certain paragraphs and text in the pre-session document and its annexes can be improved to ensure they better reflect EBSA's background and the proceedings of the technical and legal workshop held in Oslo in November, and or to prevent any ambiguous interpretation of modalities before South Africa can recommend adoption. Paragraph 1 of the introduction to the pre-session document should acknowledge that in addition to the open space or open ocean water and deep sea habitats, EBSAs have been described in many areas within territorial waters, including inshore marine, coastal, estuarine, and mangrove habitats. Secondly, the annexes make no reference to the issues of withdrawal or deletion of EBSAs, which was highlighted as needing clarity by the participants during the legal workshop held in Oslo. This may require clarification by the Secretariat. We further noted several other areas to improve clarity in the modalities. Our recommendations regarding this shall be provided in writing. I thank you.
Thank you, South Africa. Nepal, you have the floor, followed by Israel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nepal does not have marine or coastal ecosystem in its national territory. However, as a global citizen, we are linked through water, upstream, downstream, interdependency, and more importantly, due to increasing rate of melting glaciers and its cascading effect downstream, including coastal and marine ecosystem. The effect of triple planetary crisis, climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution are painfully evident in mountain areas where the warming is faster than the global average due to elevation-dependent warming, but have visible consequences in other fragile and critical ecosystems such as marine and coastal ecosystem, among others. Mountains and marine ecosystems share an unbreakable bond. Any alteration to highland environments directly influence marine biodiversity, Factors such as deforestation, natural disasters, Gulf events, floods, and pollution in mountain regions exert significant adverse effect on lowland marine ecosystem. Marine biodiversity cannot thrive in isolation. Flourishing of marine biodiversity relies on interconnected system. As a landlocked nation with over 83% of the mountainous landscape, Nepal respectfully urges the CBD Secretariat and all involved parties to prioritize and incorporate a dedicated focus on very unique mountain biodiversity. We support and appreciate the efforts put by parties in prioritizing marine and coastal ecosystem for its conservation and sustainable use, including biological and ecological significance. I request the parties and Secretariat to look at mountains with similar priority lens and bring the due attention and recognition required for the fragile, unique, and top of the world ecosystem. We hope your collective consideration could regain the glory mountains used to have in the past. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Nepal. Israel, you have the floor, followed by Fiji.
Thank you, Chair. We have comments on both documents. We'll go with 8A first. Like other parties, Israel has been involved in the EPSA process for many years, and we are really pleased to see the progress that's been made since COP15. We want to thank the Secretariat, and especially Joe, for his work on organizing the online workshops that we participated in too, and for making the amendments to the modalities that we see before us here. We are especially pleased to see progress in the modalities for modifying existing EPSAs and for listing new EPSAs. Both these areas have been missing since the EPSA process began. Israel has EPSA issues in both the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea, and we look forward to finally being able to resolve these. From Israel's point of view, the amended modalities, as they appear in the annex of the document, are fine the way they are, and we support the Chair's proposal to take them as they are directly to COP. We look forward to their adaptation at the COP later this year. We now wish to address item 8B on conservation and sustainable use. We want to thank the Secretariat for this document. As I mentioned, we have coastal areas in both the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, and Israel is concerned about conservation of the oceans. Without going into a lot of detail on the reasons, we offer a few amendments to the annex, and I think the reasons will come out from the text that we propose. And we'll send these proposals, of course, in writing. On paragraph 1G on pollution, we wish to add a phrase, and I'll read the phrase including our amendment. To assess and minimize the impacts of light pollution on deep sea ecosystems and coastal areas where sea turtle nesting occurs. We would propose also a paragraph B bis, a new paragraph, as we feel that the current list of in the annex doesn't necessarily address conservation and protection of the coastal marine areas, especially those that are most vulnerable. So we would propose the following text as paragraph B bis. To conserve and protect through effective management, legislation, and enforcement the most vulnerable and sensitive coral and marine ecosystems, such as coral reefs, kelp and mangrove forests, salt marshes, seagrasses, and others. On pollution, we support the comments made by some of the previous speakers, and we would propose a new paragraph G bis, specifically to expand on this issue. We would say to assess and minimize various forms of pollution that harm especially the marine and coastal environment. For example, plastic pollution, especially micro and nanoplastics, coastal runoff, and noise pollution, and others. On paragraph 1M, which
Sorry, Israel, may I ask you to conclude your...
I have another minute and 45 seconds, it says.
No, time on table is wrong. You spent more than 3 minutes.
Okay, I'll send my comments in writing. Thank you.
Thank you for your understanding. Fiji, you have the floor, followed by Cook Islands.
Madam Chair, Fiji welcomes the draft recommendation outlined in document CBD 26/7 Fiji's conservation and sustainable use of marine and coastal biodiversity underpins our Fijian and Pacific Islands economy and the health and well-being of our Pacific people. Fiji notes with serious concerns that there are many areas of programs of work on marine and coastal biodiversity, as well as of other CBD COP decisions on marine and coastal biodiversity has not been fully implemented. Madam Chair, in addition, Fiji recommends that the annex of CBD Substance 26/7 should include the need to better assess and understand the functional role of the blue carbon ecosystems. Fiji would like to recall decision CBD COP 10/33 on climate and biodiversity, and the reference to blue carbon ecosystems should explicitly exclude marine geoengineering proposals. Further, the precautionary approach to ensure that no geoengineering activities that may have impacts on marine and coastal biodiversity takes place until the conditions established in these decisions are met. Fiji adds that the concept of blue carbon ecosystems is still vague and still not well defined. Fiji press upon the importance of precautionary approach, and decisions on climate engineering are recalled in relation to the use of this concept. Fiji would also like to urge all parties to consider the important work of other conventions and competent bodies that is relevant to the sustainable use and conservation of marine and coastal biodiversity, and ensure that there is strong synergies in implementation of the program of work on marine and coastal biodiversity, island biodiversity, and various decisions on the CBD, including the Global Biodiversity Framework. This includes, but not limited to, the London Convention and its protocols, the ongoing work of the INC to end plastics pollution, including the marine environment, the Paris Agreement, the ISA on deep sea mining, and others. Fiji recommends that the mainstreaming of biodiversity should cover all marine sectors not yet covered by previous decisions and should not be restricted to emerging sectors. Madam Chair, Fiji will submit its full recommendations in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiji, very much. Cook Islands, followed by Belgium.
Thank you, Chair. The Cook Islands welcomes the document on further work on ecological or biological significant marine areas and commend the Secretariat for progressing with this work. We acknowledge the Secretariat for convening the expert workshop to review the modalities for modifying the description of EPSA and describing new areas. On this note, the Cook Islands supports the need for additional workshops to be conducted to better refine the description of areas meeting the EPSA criteria, and urge the Secretariat to also conduct these workshops in our Pacific region. We also support the modalities for the modification of descriptions of EPSA to allow parties to modify its EPSA sites based on new information and scientific and technological data that has become available, as well as information acquired based on the guidance and the implementation of the modalities in the annex of this document. The Cook Islands would appreciate assistance, training, and capacity development and financial support in the review of its EPSA sites, taking into account the information provided in the annex of this document. The informal advisory group on EPSA is important for advancing the EPSA work, and we urge the Secretariat to ensure those from or familiar with small islands be considered on the advisory group. Chair, on item 8B on conservation and sustainable use of marine and coastal biodiversity, the recommendations put forward by SEPSA are very broad, and many of the actions are already being progressed by the Cook Islands at the national administrative level. As an island nation, the Cook Islands marine and coastal biodiversity is important for our culture, health, and well-being. To ensure the sustainable use of our marine and coastal biodiversity, the Cook Island has declared a 50 nautical mile radius around all of its island as a strict marine protected area. While we have progressed work in the protection of our marine and coastal areas, achieving optimized and sustained implementation of our initiatives remains hampered by our limited capacities and resources to support the implementation of the scientific and technical advice. Although timelines for implementations are not highlighted in the document, time is of essence to effectively implement actions in the annex. It is critical that SEPSA understands that some marine and coastal work is already being undertaken at the national and regional level, as the last thing we need is duplication of actions, double reporting on progress. Therefore, it is important the cooperation, collaboration, and synergies with national and regional organizations is carried out for effective implementation. Chair, we have some amendments to the document on item 8A and 8B, and we'll submit this in writing for your consideration.
Thank you very much, Kokayans. Belgium, you have the floor, followed by Russian Federation.
Dear Madam Chair, thank you for giving us the floor. Belgium welcomes the 2 draft decisions on marine and coastal biodiversity, the work of the Executive Secretary on the strategic review and analysis of the programs of work, and the work done in the informal advisory group and the 2 workshops on EPSAS. On 8A, we strongly support the reference to the last UNGA resolution on oceans and the law of the sea, the recognition of the importance of EPSAS for the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and the BBNJ Agreement, the clear distinction between the repository and the information sharing mechanism, and a simple procedure for editorial errors. Secondly, we are of the opinion that discussions on matters concerning sovereignty, sovereign rights, or jurisdiction in relation to EPSAS or EPSA submissions should be postponed to COP16, given their legal or political nature. Thirdly, we would like to propose some amendments to stick to agreed language, enhance the clarity of the existing titles and the different steps of the process to include a national EPSA in the repository, complement the article on the content of the information sharing mechanism with missing aspects, create 2 separate archives for previous versions of EPSAS in the information sharing mechanism and the repository, and expand the possibility to comment on submissions to all stakeholders. Lastly, we support extension of the term of the informal advisory group, but we would like to see the request to draft the voluntary guidelines on peer review processes reiterated. On 8B, we support stronger language when it comes to the magnitude of challenges for the marine and coastal ecosystem and are concerned by the severe threats the ocean is facing, including climate change, global warming, biodiversity loss, ocean acidification, invasive alien species, unsustainable fisheries, shipping, and pollution. We propose to highlight and add these challenges throughout the text. We stress the importance of cooperation and collaboration with other multilateral environmental agreements, including for the implementation of the new BBNJ agreement. We also propose to encourage the ongoing negotiations for an internationally legally binding instrument on plastic pollution, including in the marine environment, to take the Kunming-Montreal GBF into account. Lastly, we acknowledge the importance of widespread participation of global and regional organizations, indigenous people and local communities, women, youth, and other relevant stakeholders, and acknowledge in particular the specific social and ecological context in the design and implementation of measures to address biodiversity loss and climate change. We will send our written amendments to the draft recommendation to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Belgium. Russian Federation, followed by Norway.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Now, on 8A first, we would like to note, like a great many others, the constructive and productive work of the 2 expert groups last year. And we would like to note the sound work carried out by the Secretariat of the CBD on publishing the results of the information contained in these documents, the documents of this meeting. Now, the formula in the preambular is in keeping with previous formulations within the CBD. We're ready to look at an extension of the mandate of the informal advisory group, but we believe that the technical work here must be completed following discussion and agreement regarding the modalities on work on the EPSAS. Now, in point 4, is something that we can only look at after we have resolved the modalities. And based on this, we will then be able to reflect on the continuation or not of regional meetings within the framework of the CBD. Now, the textual proposals on item 7 is something that on paragraph 7 is something we'll present to you in writing. The modalities should be based on the choices, the free choices of the parties and equality between the parties within the framework of their jurisdictions and legislation. As part of the modalities, we have a number of comments which we'll provide in writing. We have questions regarding points 8A, 8B, 13B, and so forth regarding the modalities for convening meetings. It is not clear how often they will take place and their periodicity. We still have the issue of the description within the framework of national legislation, which have already been included or which have already been deposited in repositories. On BINA, the Russian Federation backs the approach which is based on the use of the programs of work of the Convention as very important instruments for implementing the global framework. We back work carried out on analyzing and assessing existing programs, and we would like to underscore the importance of work on the marine environment, planning of the marine environment. We would propose that we set up a serious process within the framework of the Convention to assist countries on working on the planning of their marine environments to achieve Target 1. Now, we have to base ourselves on the capabilities of the Secretariat and not overburden them with additional tasks. For this reason, we would propose that paragraph 9b be deleted. As part of the work proposed within the framework of BBNG, well, we consider this to be a little premature. I'm referring here to carrying out such work on such a scale prior to the entry into force and the identification of key directions of work. And for this reason, we believe that it is not useful at this point to implement the provisions of paragraph 8. We should delete it. We will send in our proposals on paragraph 7 in writing, and we propose that everything in paragraph 26 of the document should be transferred into the body of the recommendation itself. We do not like the references to the preambular parts of the document. I'm referring to the pre-session document. All of this should be contained within the body of the recommendation itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Russian Federation. Norway, you have the floor, followed by Philippines.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First for sub-item A on EBSAS. Norway considers the issues of finalizing modalities for establishing ecological or biological significant marine areas to be important for the sustainable management of marine and coastal areas. We appreciate the good work done to facilitate the discussions and move the descriptions of the modalities forward. Norway welcomes and supports the recommendation as it is, including the modalities in an annex. For sub-item B, Norway recognizes the work already done and ongoing on conservation and sustainable use of marine and coastal biodiversity, and believes that strengthening this work is important for implementation of the GBF and also to inform the BBNJ agreement. Norway appreciates the extensive effort on capacity building and coordination between organizations and initiatives and supports the continuation of this work. Cross-sectoral cooperation between relevant organizations is vital for success for conservation and sustainable use, in particular in the marine environment. So we support the suggested recommendation as it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Norway. Philippines, you have the floor, followed by Costa Rica.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have comments on both items 8A and 8B. So for item 8A, the Philippines generally supports the further work done to operationalize the identification of additional and modification of existing ecologically or biologically significant marine areas laid out in SALSA document 26/7 ad 1. We recognize the EBSA's crucial role to achieve several targets of the KMGBF as well as with the agreement under the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction. Therefore, we recommend a revision on the fourth preambular paragraph of the recommendation as follows. Recognizing that the description of ecologically or biologically significant marine areas is an important scientific and technical process that is crucial to the implementation of the KMGBF and the agreement under the UNCLOS on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction. Further, recognizing that the identification of EBSAs is clearly a scientific exercise using published reports to determine areas of global significance, the Philippines firmly recommends that the reason for modification of EBSAs within or beyond areas of national jurisdiction be science-based. With this, the country would like to recommend the deletion of paragraph 1C of the annex and the inclusion of the word within end on paragraph 1B of the same annex to be read as follows: for areas within and beyond the limits of national jurisdiction. Finally, the Philippines fully supports the archiving of previous versions of identified EBSAs as modified, whether in the repository or the CBD information sharing mechanism for transparency. Then with regard to item 8B, we supports the recommendations laid out in subset document 26/7, including the annex therein, which further identifies the gaps and areas in need of additional focus under the Convention on Biological Diversity to support the implementation of the KMGBF with regard to marine, coastal, and island biodiversity. There is, however, an urgent need for the recommendations contained within the program of work to be implemented to support the implementation of the KMGBF. In addition to the operational paragraphs in the said recommendation in Part 6 of document subset 26/7, the Philippines proposes a new operational paragraph therein to be read as para 10 as follows. Request the United Nations Environment Programme's World Conservation Monitoring Center to develop a template based on Annex 3 of Decision CBD, COP Decision 14/8 on the criteria for identification of OECMs to improve, standardize, and facilitate the submission of data on other effective area-based conservation measures by parties, other governments, and relevant organizations in collaboration with indigenous peoples and local communities. Further requests developed country parties and other developing country parties in the position to do so, including other international organizations, to mobilize financial support for the immediate work of identification of OECMs. This template is something that will be useful and enable CBD parties, including the Philippines, which committed to take steps to realize Target 3 of KMGBF, fulfill said 30/30 target. Also, it is recommended that the annex of CBD/substas/26/7 should include the need to better assess and understand the functional role of blue carbon ecosystems, thus the proposed revision to Annex 1 letter H, which reads, to better assess and understand the role of blue carbon ecosystems and manage blue carbon ecosystems effectively in order to enhance their role in climate change
Philippines,
mitigation.
may I ask you to conclude your intervention?
We will just submit our statement, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Costa Rica, you have the floor, followed by European Union.
Gracias.
Thank you, Chair. First, I'll refer to agenda item 8A on further work with regards to EBSAs. Costa Rica would like to thank the Secretariat for drafting document CBD/Substa/26/7 add 1. On its content, would like to remind those present that EBSAs provide assistance to decision-making on biological richness and ecological richness in areas beyond national jurisdiction, and do not include topics of sovereignty in dispute between parties. Costa Rica supports the fact that the informal advisory group on EBSAs continue its work. in light of the fact that its mandate needs to be completed, we support the extension requested since technical and scientific products created by the group until now have been of great value for the parties. Finally, on recommendation under subparagraph 20.7 on synergies between the process to facilitate the description of areas which meet the criteria of EBSAs and the implementation of the Agreement on Biological Diversity Beyond National Jurisdiction, BBNJ, we prefer that the recommendation should have welcomes rather than just notes. Now, Chair, I will move on to agenda item 8B, conservation and sustainable use of marine coastal biodiversity. Chair, Costa Rica thanks Secretariat for drafting document CBD/Subster/26/7. We would like to underline the importance of recognising the work conducted under the Convention, and this needs to support the work of the United Nations General Assembly on the sustainable use and conservation of biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. According that's set out in relevant paragraphs. In the Annex Recommendations Document 26.7, subparagraph 1b, it's important to recognise that not just other effective measures for area-based conservation require more attention and support for the implementation of the framework, but also the creation of systems of protected areas which are ecologically representative, well-connected and equitably governed, which require more attention and support of all kinds in order to achieve Target 3 of the framework. Costa Rica recognises and welcomes with thanks facts and subparagraph 1n in reference to the integration of considerations of gender in the sustainable use and conservation of marine and coastal biodiversity is an area that also requires more attention. In addition, we welcome that set out in subparagraph 2k of the annex with regards to understanding the multiple values of island biodiversity, in particular with regard to indigenous peoples and local communities. But we do believe that it would be more appropriate to highlight this topic under paragraph 1 and not ascribe it only to island biodiversity. Finally, Costa Rica believes that under this work, we should have synergies with the future legally binding instrument for the elimination of plastic pollution, including the marine environment, and with Resolution UNEA 615, which was proposed by Costa Rica with the European Union during UNEA 6, which is called Strengthening Efforts within Oceans to Tackle Climate Change, Loss of Biodiversity and Pollution in the Marine Environment. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Costa Rica. I would like to ask again parties to speak slowly in your interventions. I mean, we know there is a pressure on you, but also there is a pressure on translators. European Union, you have the floor, followed by United Kingdom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This statement concerns agenda item 8B. The EU supports the statement made by Belgium. The ongoing 4th global coral bleaching event is the second one within less than 10 years. It clearly demonstrates that biodiversity loss and climate change are not merely interlinked crises, but biodiversity loss and climate change are interdependent emergencies which require immediate, accelerated and integrated implementation of technological and nature-based and societal solutions. Dieback of coral reefs is listed by IPCC amongst the unique systems which are getting dangerously close to irreversible tipping points. At this moment, no one can tell if and how many of the bleached coral reefs will recover. Loss of coral reefs means loss of livelihood of 500 million people who depend directly or indirectly on coral reefs. Loss of coral reefs also means that several targets of the Kunming-Moray Global Biodiversity Framework will be slipping out of reach. Considering this, we find that the proposed draft recommendation should be strengthened. It should also appeal to implement the priority actions for coral reefs which we have adopted at CBD COP12. We have a number of suggestions in line with the report of the expert workshop on the island of Wilm available on the website of the Subster meeting. We will submit them in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, European Union. United Kingdom, you have the floor, followed by Sweden.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to speak to both items under this agenda item. Firstly, regarding agenda item 8A, subster document 26/7/add1, the UK strongly supports the information provided by ecologically and biologically significant marine areas and welcomes the Convention's efforts to support EBSA description through workshops to date. We would like to thank the Secretariat for arranging intersessional work on the EBSA modalities following COP15. The UK participated in the recent technical and legal expert workshops, and we are pleased to see the progress made there has been reflected in these new streamlined modalities. It is important to maintain the scientific integrity of EBSA descriptions and of the processes to describe them. This is essential if EBSAs are to inform potential new areas for protection and conservation, including the identification of area-based management tools in areas beyond national jurisdiction under the BBNJ agreement once it enters into force. We need to ensure there is opportunity to update and improve the science behind existing descriptions through modalities to allow modification, as well as promoting high-quality science in any new descriptions. Although the descriptions of EBSAs is strictly a scientific and technical exercise, there is a political element to any geographical delineations, so it is important that the modalities respect the rights of states over their national jurisdiction, sovereignty, and sovereign rights. We welcome the two-pathway solution for areas within national jurisdiction, which provides this flexibility, and we will engage in the discussion on this basis. There are a few elements in the modalities that require some clarification and discussion for the two pathways, including the provisions for notification, comments, and objection, and whether the modification includes withdrawal or removal of an EBSA. However, the UK feels these modalities are a solid base to build on, and we have submitted some proposals in writing. Regarding item 8B, the UK welcomes this timely and thorough review of the programmes of work on marine and coastal biodiversity and on island biodiversity, particularly in our role as chair of the Global Ocean Alliance of 77 countries. We believe that it is critically important to identify the further work needed to support parties to achieve the ambitious global outcomes for the ocean that were agreed at COP15. However, we recognise that depending on capacity and available budget, it may become necessary to further prioritise the work listed in the annex following the review of other programmes of work to be considered at SBI. We welcome the continuation of capacity building and partnership activities under the Sustainable Ocean Initiative. We also welcome the synergies with other agreements highlighted in the recommendation, notably the BBNJ agreement, given the role the BBNJ will have in supporting implementation of the GBF in areas beyond national jurisdiction, particularly in terms of Target 3. We support the scoping of opportunities for the CBD to inform implementation of the BBNJ agreement through information sharing and collaboration, including through an expert workshop. We would, however, advise that this workshop does not take place imminently to allow time for the BBNJ Preparatory Committee to undertake further work to support entry into force and implementation. We also propose some specific changes to the recommendation and accompanying annex, which in the interest of time we provided in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, United Kingdom. Before I give the floor to Sweden, I would like to close the list and 6:15, actually after one more intervention, we will adjourn this session. Sweden, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We will speak to both items, starting with agenda item 8A. Dear colleagues, the time has come to finalize our long-standing work on developing modalities for modifying descriptions of EBSAs and describing new EBSAs. Now is our opportunity to ensure that our EBSA process will be future-proof. In general, Sweden supports the proposed modalities, and Sweden supports the proposal of having all submission and records of submission of all types of EBSA description in the information share mechanism based on the modalities described in the annex. The new function of the information share mechanism should be outlined in Article 6 of the annex. For clarification, we would like to include wording in Article 9 of the Annex that clarifies that it is only during the initial step of processing of the submission that the EBSA's description aiming to be included in the repository is placed in the information sharing mechanism. Sweden would like to highlight the important link between the EBSA process and the BBNJ agreement and the added value of having both these complementary processes in place. We believe that the EBSA descriptions are vital to inform the BBNJ agreement and that the important work of describing special places for biodiversity in the ocean should continue to deliver solid and up-to-date scientific information to support CBD work, including contributing to the implementation of the GBF. In regards to agenda item 8B, Sweden emphasizes that the new BBNJ agreement is instrumental to reaching the GBF targets and therefore welcomes the continued cooperation between the CBD Secretariat and DOALOS. We support the proposals for modalities for cooperation with relevant global and regional organizations within the framework of the BBNJ agreement, including the proposal to hold a joint workshop in the future. We wish this important cooperation fair winds and smooth sailing. Sweden stresses the need to address the identified gaps of the program of work, especially regarding links between the climate change agenda and the marine and coastal biodiversity agenda. Among these gaps, priority should be given to conservation of ecosystems particularly sensitive to climate change. For example, biodiversity associated with sea ice and coral reefs. Guidance to apply nature-based solution and restoration and management of blue carbon ecosystems, such as seagrass, mangrove, and kelp. For clarity, we suggest separating the gaps for marine and coastal biodiversity and island biodiversity into different sections in the document. Sweden also stresses the need to continue the important work of taking measures to prevent, mitigate, and minimize threats and human impacts on biodiversity, such as pollution, loss of habitats, unsustainable fishing, invasive alien species, climate change, and ocean acidification. In line with this, Sweden would like to include a reference to the negotiations of the new plastic pollution agreement, which takes into consideration the GBF. We strongly support continued and increased cooperation between the CBD, regional sea conventions, and competent international organizations such as ISA, IMO, and regional fisheries bodies. Finally, Sweden supports the continuation of capacity building and partnership activities under the Sustainable Ocean Initiative, including the important work on OCMs. We will send our proposed amendments to the draft recommendation to the Secretary in writing for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sweden, for your intervention. Now I will just inform you that on the list for speakers in our next session, there are 28 parties. I will not read them now all to not take your time, but please be aware of time that we have for consideration of this agenda item. Thank you very much. And just beside parties, we do have still a list of observers that we wish to hear. Thank you very much for your interventions. I will ask Secretariat if there is any announcement. Okay. Thank you. Session is adjourned. But this is full session tomorrow.